this law prohibit us for having the same rights as any cis heteronorm person.
Hi, I'm Puck Lowe, a filmmaker, researcher, and writer. You're listening to The Next World, a podcast about building movements. Every month, we'll celebrate and be in conversation with the work being done by poor people's movements, especially in the U.S. We want to highlight organizing led by women, queer people, and people of color who are pushing forward new models of systemic change. I'm here today with New Orleans-based Amina Massey. She's a medical sociologist and an artist. Her work looks at social determinants of health, chronic illness, and systemic disenfranchisement. Welcome to today's show, Amina.
Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to talk with you and later with Wendi Cooper about policing, gentrification, race, health, everything related to New Orleans, and also some of your personal work as well. I'm curious if you could just sort of describe all of the different things that you work on and how you see them relate to each other.
Yeah, so I tend to approach systemic racism and disenfranchisement from a health perspective because I find while it's urgent, I also find that people respond to it urgently and more empathetically than other conversations about oppression. So I look at the ways in which we structure our societies and our cities impacts the health of individuals and populations, especially those that have been marginalized historically. So I believe that social policy is health policy, and I advocate for changes in education, food access, transportation, housing that will socially support people who have not received any social supports. I've been in New Orleans about 6 years, and since I've been here, I've witnessed the way surveillance and policing have increased specifically towards the people who support the cultural economy here, the culture bearers, the musicians, the artists. And while the tourist economy focuses on exporting our cultural products, we're still not supported or compensated for the labor that we enact to provide it. And so I've been focusing more on the local cultural economy of New Orleans and the way that violence and policing have affected us here.
And what does that look like on the ground? Like, could you describe that, both the culture work and that repression?
I mean, the biggest issue is money. The biggest issue is compensation. But you could recently on Frenchman Street, there was an incident that received national attention when the police violently attacked a group of musicians playing music on Frenchman, which is a longstanding tradition in New Orleans. Even when people move here, that's one of the places they're aware of first. And someone called the police on a band and attacked the smallest member of the band. And it was caught on film on a body cam, and it went viral. So now there's more of a discussion about police tactics. There's a bit more visibility on the way in which cultural workers are policed physically as well as economically, in my opinion. So I think that's a very clear example for me of the way in which the interests of the wealthy, even people moving to New Orleans from other places, are defining the agenda for the way in which Black people, brown people, queer and trans people are policed.
Right.
And are often surviving violence at the hands of the state.
I mean, that's an interesting example, too, the one with the musicians and Frenchmen. Like, in that example, who's creating wealth and who's profiting from that?
Right. I mean, I think that's what's been interesting to me living here, or horrifying really, is watching how quickly, before I lived in New Orleans, I was in school in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I witnessed rapid gentrification in San Francisco and Oakland. And in New Orleans, the pace is slightly different, but the interests are similar. And there's a lot of land grabbing and real estate grabbing that happened quickly in the years after Katrina. And now I think we're seeing kind of the new manifestation of those wealthy interests that don't necessarily have any interest in maintaining the livelihoods of the people who create this city.
So maybe let's go back to medical sociology for a minute. I think that's an interesting frame, and to apply that to, policies of gentrification, in particular, these policies and practices that are pushing out the musicians who give a place culture. Maybe talk about what medical sociology even is and what it can give to us.
Yeah, so I view it as the study of power and health. I look at it as the ways that our power relationships influence our health outcomes by structuring the world we share. So to me, issues of caste and class determine who has access to social resources. So New Orleans is another good example of this because we don't have grocery stores. We don't have grocery stores in most neighborhoods. The educational system is completely chartered at this point. We don't have public schools. We don't have many hospitals or healthcare centers. And when we do, there's limited access, there's limited transportation. So these are the kinds of things I think that directly contribute to the vulnerability of certain groups of people. And we see how those systems recreate themselves despite a long history of resistance, despite the fact that there have been people pushing for grocery stores or pushing for larger healthcare centers. We see that moneyed interests come in and redirect those campaigns in the interests of the wealthy. And I think the way New Orleans is structured kind of as almost a vacation city for people to come and enjoy the music and enjoy the food and enjoy, the fruit of our history here. We don't necessarily structure things socially to provide for the health and livelihood and quality of life for people who live here, whether or not they're a cultural worker.
Right, right. I'm curious if you can talk some about your work on chronic illness and how people organize around that.
Yeah, so my dissertation work I interviewed Black women who practice Christianity about their experiences with chronic illnesses, and I did it using photo voice and photo elicitation interviews, meaning I provided women with a camera for a few weeks, asked them to take photos of their experiences navigating illness, and then reviewed those photos with them during the interview to elicit memories of their lived daily experience. And what came out of that for me ended up being a focus on social systems of support and the way that the Black women I interviewed come from a lot of different social situations. Some are pastors' wives, some are living on the street, some have children, some don't. And all of them kind of most of them reference themes of a lack of support, whether it was due to the stigma of their illness or just people not knowing how to support them. And so I've ended up focusing on ways that we can create accountable community and supportive community for people who are surviving trauma and people who are navigating illness, especially ongoing illness like chronic illness. So my work now is kind of pulling out the themes that I received from the women I spoke to about how to create supportive community and how individuals can create networks of support, but also how as a society we can create built-in supports for the people who need them.
Yeah, talk more about what that support looked like, how people were able to practice that and implement it.
Well, unfortunately, most weren't, and that's kind of what I hope to remedy. Like even in the places where you would expect to find a certain level of support from family or religious community or social community, there's just often people who are not receiving, especially in the experience of illness, receiving support physically, let alone socially, emotionally, psychologically. So I've seen certain programs that intend to provide more of that support be really effective when they take into account the patient's goals for health and wellness, which often go beyond a doctor's goals for wellness, to be a bit more holistic. And so, especially since I was talking to women with a spiritual practice, that came up a lot in terms of finding ways to create care plans, treatment plans that incorporate the priorities of the patient as a central part of the treatment, and not just, telling patients what to do, labeling them non-compliant, and then potentially refusing them further treatment, which is what happens a lot when people are unable to come in for doctor's appointments or adhere to medication. I mean, that's within the medical system, but also just socially, I think I look at ways that we can respond to each other empathetically, even in the work we do to address those systems. So now I think it's a bit more common to hear about compassionate activism and healing activism, but I think for a lot of, especially Black women involved in the work to change the communities we live in or just survive with the people we love, we've been overtaxed and undersupported by that work and kind of accepted that reality. And one of my goals is to redefine strength for Black women in ways that include vulnerability, seeking support, and accepting and receiving support.
I'm curious about, I noticed when I was looking at your website that you also do some healing work, like you work with plants.
I do. I'm studying herbalism. I work with plants and minerals to make plant medicine. That's something I started. I have 3 autoimmune illnesses myself, and I'm a religious person, so my dissertation is very much about my own journey as well. But I started working with plants in Brazil when I was exposed to medicinal baths in a religious community of Candomblé. And I developed the practice further at home with elders in my own community and herbalists in my family and community. And I started just making things for myself to alleviate pain. I prefer not to take pharmaceutical medication. And at one point I was on, like 17 pills a day. And at this point I'm not really on any by necessity. So I have engaged plants as ancestors to really work with them energetically and physically to heal myself. And that expanded. Once I was in New Orleans, I was surrounded by people who respect plant medicine, and I ended up expanding what I do, my personal practice, to start a small business called Antidote, where I make herbal infusions, teas, smoke blends, things to alleviate pain, but also things to support people's emotional and psychological health, which I feel for me is a priority. I think we often neglect our emotional health in ways that directly affect our bodies. For me, the richness of working with Earth has been that all of those needs are answered in one way or another. I find that working with plants allows me to address physical ailments, which is usually what people will come to me for. And then as we talk, the emotional underlying, the spiritual underlying will reveal itself. And I think I focus on all of it.
Right. We're being joined now by Wendi Cooper. She's the coordinator of the Transcending Women program at Operation Restoration, which is an organization that works with formerly incarcerated women. It's great to have you today, Wendi.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, Amina and I have just been talking a little bit about health and criminalization and New Orleans. I know you've done a lot of work with or against the NOPD. I'm curious if you could talk some about what that has been.
Yeah, so me, I'm the type of person who, I speak on experience, right? And the reason why is because, years ago, in the late 90s, I remember being stopped by an officer in the city of New Orleans. I I remember being on my way to go meet some friends at a club which was on Esseline and Claiborne, and I was stopped by an officer. When I was stopped by the officer, me and the officer began to engage in conversation. However, I knew that the officer was a police officer because he had on uniform. He was in a car. Uniform and car. And while we were engaging in these conversations, whatever, 10 minutes into the conversation, the officer had arrested me from a crime against nature. And from there, I began to, affiliate myself with other organizations like Women with a Vision, who started the No Justice Project, right? And basically, the No Justice Project was a movement to help people who were convicted of the crime against nature law at that point in time had to register as sex offenders, right? And I was a key witness in the case to allow us to get over 800 people who was convicted of crime against nature to be removed from the sex offender registry.
Could you go back to the crime against nature law? That's not a thing that exists everywhere, and it's wild that it exists at all in Louisiana. But could you give us some background on that?
Yes. So under the Louisiana statute RS 1489, right, crime against nature is a law it was a law that was written, in the 1800s, actually 1805, And this law was used to punish, individuals for practicing non-procreative sex acts. So if you was to have oral or anal sex in the state of Louisiana, you could be charged with a crime against nature. In Louisiana, prior to 2012, if you was convicted of crime against nature, you was required to register as a sex offender for the first offense. However, if you was convicted of a second conviction of crime against nature, then you had to register for the duration of your life. And during this time, the history of this law was used to, as I say, punish people for practicing sodomy. You was forbidden to do these things, right? You was forbidden to be in same gender-loving relationships because it was prohibited to be able to be yourself or be who you are, because if you was to be who you were, you was going to be charged with this law.
Let me just clarify then. So the crime against nature statute made it illegal to practice sodomy or oral sex in the state of Louisiana.
Correct.
Wow. And so
that's a felony charge, I think, too.
Wow.
Yes.
And if you were charged once, you have to register on a sex offender registry. And if you are charged twice, you have to register for life?
Yes. And up until 2012, when the federal courts ruled that the law itself is unconstitutional.
Okay. So they did rule on, and were you part of that fight?
Yes, I was. I was a plaintiff in a case. It was me and 8 other plaintiffs, but they was anonymous, so we really don't know who each other were. And I think I'll probably be the only person, the only plaintiff that's in a case that really talk about the crime against nature law itself. That
is unbelievable. So when you were a plaintiff in this case, what was that like? How did you participate?
It was very surreal. I mean, I remember getting a phone call from a friend of mine, and she was telling me that they had some lawyers, censor of constitutional rights, was coming down to discuss, to challenge the crime against nature law. And when I had the conversation with her, I didn't believe it, because it's just like, when it comes down to this law, it's very controversial. Like, people just didn't really want to be bothered with it, right? It was just like, it's on the books, there's nothing that we can do, and that just was that. So I really didn't, believe what my friend was telling me. But then I got a call from one of the lawyers for the Center for Constitutional Rights. His name was Alexis, and also I got a call from one of the instructors at Loyola University, which is Davita Finger. She's a lawyer. She's a professor at Loyola University, and also she's a lawyer. And they was telling me that they wanted to meet me and they wanted to talk about, the crime against nature law. I began to tell them my story about, how I was affected by the crime against nature law. And then they wanted to, do this big lawsuit. I didn't think that it was going to go well, but it did.
Yeah. So when were you arrested for this law?
1999 and 2001.
Okay.
I was arrested.
Wow. As a consequence of getting arrested, were you incarcerated? Did you have to sign on to the registry? How did this change your life?
Yes. So when I was arrested on both separate counts of the crime against nature, both times, Judge Patrick Quinlan, who's no longer here, he gave me a year probation for both charges separately. And one of the requirements was I had to register as a sex offender. Being a sex offender, you had to pass out notifications. You had to, when you're going into different spaces like schools or anything that is pertaining to children, you have to let people know in advance, that you are a sex offender and that you're coming into their establishment, right? Also, when if you was a sex offender, because of the crime against nature law, you was prohibited from participating in holidays that's pertaining to kids, like Halloween and Easter and all these things, And if you resided at an address and just said it was Halloween, you had to keep your lights off. If you was a sex offender, you wasn't allowed to have your porch light on because kids was not allowed to come knock on your door. And also, being on a sex offender register, it was very scary because it was more like, I would call it a online dating site where people have your address and people, who was fascinated by, a lot of the women who was labeled as sex offenders for crime against nature law. People used to come knock on your door and solicit sex from you, and it was very scary, it was very challenging as well.
And so when you became a part of this lawsuit and were successful in overturning this law, that must have been huge.
It was very huge, but it was like I couldn't believe it. Like I couldn't believe that, I was no longer a sex offender, right? Like I was conditioned that I was taught that you are that person, right? And even when I didn't no longer have to register as a sex offender, I still felt like I was that person. I still felt like I was a sex offender. I didn't want to be around children. I didn't want to I didn't want to live around schools. I wasn't participating in, the holidays that, that were forbidding for sex offenders, right? Having that label, it kind of I was institutionalized.
Yeah.
If I'm making sense, I was institutionalized mentally, that was my form of prison. And for me, it took me like a couple of years to realize that I am not that person. I never was that person, right? And so that's why a few years ago, I just really came to realization that I'm no longer that person that they label me as.
Right. Wow, that is so deep.
Yeah. And what's so crazy, how this crime against nature law, it is, and I tell people, all the time, like this law itself, right, it's the matriarch. It's the mother of the destruction of LGBTQ people destruction, right? This law holds a lot of weight. They didn't want to take this unconstitutional law down because in 2014, Representative Pat Smith tried to get the law repealed because, the sheriff's office in Baton Rouge had arrested 14 men at a park and took them to the hotel and he charged them with crime against nature. And when she tried to get the law repealed, it failed.
Huh. So what is the work right now? Is it still trying to get the law repealed, or what is your work right now?
But what I'm doing now, I just started the Cans Can Stand campaign. The Cans part is Crime Against Nature by Solicitation, and it's Can't Stand. So that's the name of my campaign that I've been bringing awareness. Yeah, and the base of this campaign is to educate and bring awareness and try to help to get this law, the certain provisions of this law, the unconstitutional part. At the end of August, I'm going to be doing a Can't Stand March for Justice walk. And we're going to walk the streets of the city of New Orleans to bring awareness and to educate people about this law and hoping people get involved in, trying to get this law eradicated. Because as I said earlier, like the Crime Against Nature law itself is like the matriarch of our destruction, right? This law prohibits us for, having the same rights as any cis heteronorm person. So I think it's important that, I educate and bring awareness to this injustice that we have to still face, right, for over 200 or something years.
Wow. Amina, I'm really curious what you think about this and how you think laws like this and economies like this fit into New Orleans in general, and in particular, how it would affect, struggles of formerly incarcerated women, for instance.
I mean, I think it's just another way. It has the effect of disenfranchising queer and trans people from rights of citizenship and from basic human rights. It's another way to create this caste system that we were talking about earlier, not just in terms of access, because, with a felony conviction, it's harder to get jobs, housing, all of the things that we need to be safe, but also in the public imagination to cast specifically women of color, trans women of color, and queer folks as pathologized, as sick, as criminal, in a way that affects the way we're treated every day. So to me, it fits in with like the increase in surveillance and policing and incarceration that we see, and the decrease in social resources like housing and food and education. It's a specifically morally based attack on women and sex workers and queer folks. And I think, what Wendi is describing aligns with that.
Yeah.
Just the boldness and asserting that anything is against nature is just so absurd.
Right. It's immoral. And it's interesting to me too that I'm pretty sure a sex work conviction is a misdemeanor, but this is a felony. So this is a way to remove even more rights of citizenship than they already were.
As we close up, are there any final thoughts from either of you on this or anything else?
Well, I just want to let people know that we have a march. It's August the 31st. The march is going to start at Louis Armstrong Park on North Rampart Street in the French Quarter area, and it's going to end at Duncan Plaza right across from City Hall. Anybody want to be a part of this march? The march starts at 1 o'clock. We're going to have speakers. I'm going to have Judge Arthur Hunter. I'm going to have the Human Relations Commissioner. I'll be messing up his title too, the Human Relations Commissioner, Vincenzo Pasquale Antonio. I can't pronounce that word. It's so hard to pronounce. But it's another name, but I don't know the title offhand. I got to get accustomed to this new title that he has. Also, I have Kaneem Mafia. She's also going to be a speaker. Everybody might know her as Taylor. And also I'm going to have Milan Sherry. She's also going to be a speaker as well. She's also doing a march in November, Trans Resilient March. And also I'm going to have 1 hour matriarchs in the trans community, which is Karen Collins. She's also going to be a speaker as well. So if y'all want to come out, it's August 31st from 1 to 5. Hopefully we're going to have food, drinks, and things like that. If you have any questions that you want to ask people or whatever, you can, try to bring awareness to this injustice and try to get this law removed.
And Wendi, how can people follow and support your work?
Yes. So you can email me at Wendi, Wendi, at aura-nola.org. Or you can call me at 504-205-1220. More information, you can contact me at them too.
Awesome. And how about you, Amina? How can people stay in touch with you and keep updated?
Well, I have a website at AminaDesellMassey.com. So it's AminaDesellMassey, one word. And that's my professional website. I also have the plant medicine website at antidoteshop.co, which is ANTIDOTESHOP.co. So you can follow that work there. And my email address is admassey@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much today to both of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
To close out today's show, our Minute of Resistance, a poem, Folds and Shakes by Amina Massey.
I am a woman and my body folds and shakes and spreads. I'm a woman on the bus, my breasts and stomach and behind fill the whole seat. I am a woman on the street, my hips rock side to side down the curb. I am a woman zipped up or down and always in this my body. I am a woman catcalled and doubted on my way to work or school. I am a woman recognizing other women, gracing the labor of our minds and these our bodies. I am a woman and my body tumbles in on me in pain or laughter or prayer. I am a woman crying chest-filled sobs or no tears at all. I am a woman with a pin-calloused middle finger on my right hand. I am a woman sweat-stained armpits at sunshined block parties or state penitentiaries or over the burning stove for my family or myself. I am a woman and my body dancing is the joy of music moving. My body bounces everywhere, thighs and all. I am a woman is never safe, and my body is not simply loved by anyone but me. I am a woman, and my body, I am a woman.
If you enjoy listening to our podcast, check out Building Local Power, a bi-weekly podcast from our friends at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Building Local Power features conversations that you won't hear anywhere else. Tune in for thought-provoking discussions of economic power and democracy, as well as new ideas on how communities can take charge of their own economic futures. You can find them on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can find out more about us at nesri.org. That's nesri.org. And thank you to Jesse Strauss for sound mixing. Keep building, and until next time.